On July 28, 2026, 9 days after the World Cup final, FIFA announced it was selling 20% of the World Cup to private investors. They called it FIFA Forward Enterprise. They were asking $4.2 billion. UEFA's response was 3 words: football is not FIFA's.
Well, FIFA Forward Enterprise, or FFE, is actually a proposal.
FIFA President Gianni Infantino is proposing a new body, 20% of which would be owned by private investors. That body would then run major tournaments, including the World Cup. One of the primary private investors would be Josh Kushner, the brother-in-law of President Trump's daughter Ivanka.
3 days later, FIFA scrapped the plan. That collapse tells you everything about the war that is actually being fought in football right now. Over the past few months, the most powerful man in football has opened war on almost every front. He's fighting UEFA, he's fighting Europe's biggest clubs, he's fighting the domestic leagues, he's trying to bring private capital into FIFA. He expanded the Club World Cup despite fierce opposition. And now he's at the center of another political battle over the 2030 World Cup final. They're fronts in the same war. Not a war over the next World Cup. Not even a war over Gianni Infantino. A war over something much bigger. Who will control the business of football for the next 30 years? Because for more than a century, FIFA wrote the rules. Now it's trying to rewrite the entire business. To understand why Infantino is fighting on so many fronts at once, we first have to destroy one of football's deepest myths. Most people believe FIFA controls football. It doesn't. FIFA governs football. Those two things are not the same. The numbers tell you why. The 2026 World Cup cycle generates about $13 billion for FIFA once every 4 years. The Premier League alone generates approximately $8.2 billion each year, and then does it again the next year, and the year after that. Every year, without a World Cup. That economic engine had a single center of gravity, Europe, because it controlled the competitions that generated the money. The clubs created the stars, the leagues created the audiences, the broadcasters paid for weekly attention, sponsors followed that attention, and attention became the most valuable currency in football. FIFA owned the biggest event, Europe owned the biggest business. For years the balance worked, until something fundamental began to change. Every successful institution eventually becomes trapped by the model that made it successful. FIFA was no exception. FIFA governed, Europe collected. Then something shifted. New markets with enormous capital started looking at football and seeing a business too big, too global, and too profitable to remain almost exclusively European. Suddenly, the old monopoly no longer looked natural. It looked limited. FIFA saw the opening. It could keep playing the respectful regulator of a system that mainly enriched Europe, or it could use this new capital and these new ambitions to break that monopoly and build its own permanent commercial empire. It chose the second path. The moment it did that, it stopped being a regulator. It became a competitor. And competitors don't get the benefit of the doubt, which is exactly what the next 4 years proved. This is where most people get the story backwards.
So the head of FIFA says the 2030 World Cup might have 64 teams. The idea is going to be looked at and discussed. Every nation should have the chance to dream of playing at football's biggest event. We're definitely getting closer to that. 64 contenders would mean that for every country that's even a member of FIFA, 1 in 3 would qualify for the World Cup.
They think the expanded Club World Cup is the strategy. It isn't. It's the tool. The strategy is much bigger. FIFA is trying to build something it has never truly had. A permanent commercial engine, one that doesn't depend on the World Cup, one that generates value every cycle, not every 4 years. Suddenly, every controversial decision starts to fit. The Club World Cup isn't just another tournament, it's a new global product. The search for outside investors wasn't just about raising money, it was about accelerating that transformation. The United States wasn't chosen by accident. Saudi Arabia wasn't embraced by accident. They're the two markets with the capital, the ambition, and the political willingness to help build football's next economic center. Which also explains why the resistance has been so fierce. Because if FIFA succeeds, someone else inevitably loses. UEFA's 55 member associations voted unanimously to boycott FIFA competitions if the plan went ahead. 0 abstentions. Their statement was precise. The World Cup cannot be treated as an investment product. It is one of football's greatest sporting legacies. For 30 years, the answer to where do the best players go was always the same. For almost 30 years, Europe never had to ask where the world's best footballer would play. The answer was obvious. Europe wasn't just home to the biggest clubs, it was where every great career reached its highest value. Then, in the summer of 2023, the best football player in the world had a choice. Lionel Messi could have returned to Barcelona. Saudi Arabia was prepared to offer him one of the richest contracts in the history of sport. Instead, he chose Inter Miami. Most people treated it as the final lifestyle decision of an extraordinary career. They missed what the market saw. The world's most valuable football asset had just left Europe's ecosystem, not for another European giant, not for more Champions League titles, but for a league that, only a few years earlier, barely existed in the global football conversation. Overnight, Major League Soccer stopped being just an American league. It became a global product. Apple suddenly had a subscription platform built around the biggest player on earth. The United States gained unprecedented momentum less than 3 years before hosting the 2026 World Cup. FIFA watched the value of one of its most important future markets accelerate. Messi didn't move because of FIFA, there is no evidence of that, but his decision aligned perfectly with the direction football's economics were already taking. Months earlier, Cristiano Ronaldo had transformed Saudi Arabia into a destination the football world could no longer ignore. The 2 biggest names of their generation had done something unprecedented. They hadn't strengthened Europe's dominance. They had increased the value of 2 markets that FIFA needed to succeed. Suddenly, Europe's monopoly no longer looked inevitable. It looked vulnerable. And monopolies don't surrender. They fight. They resist. They protect what made them dominant. Europe's football establishment had every reason to fight. This was never just about another tournament or another calendar dispute. It was about something more dangerous. FIFA acting like a competitor instead of a regulator. And then there was the 2030 World Cup final. Spain, Portugal, and Morocco are co-hosts. Spain assumed the final would be at the Bernabeu. Morocco had other ideas.
In the heart of North Africa, where the Atlantic winds meet the Moroccan sun, a colossal dream is rising from the red earth. A dream of ambition, a dream of design, a dream built for the world. We're in Casablanca, Morocco's largest city, the beating heart of its economy, and soon home to the largest football stadium on earth, the Grand Stade de Casablanca, also known as Stade Hassan II.
Morocco is building the Hassan II Stadium near Casablanca. 115,000 seats, $12 billion in public investment. That number only makes financial sense if the stadium hosts the 2030 World Cup final. FIFA has scored the Bernabeu, the Camp Nou, and the Hassan II identically in its bid documentation. No published selection criteria exist. Moroccan officials have openly said they want the final, arguing that Africa has hosted only one World Cup final in history, South Africa 2010, and that a purpose-built stadium gives FIFA more control. Reports emerged that Infantino had privately linked the final to political support from African federations ahead of his re-election. FIFA denied any promise, but the optics were clear. Infantino has visited Morocco multiple times, opened a FIFA regional office there, and scheduled the 2027 Congress and presidential election in Rabat. Suddenly, every confrontation looked different. The lawsuits, the calendar war, the Club World Cup resistance, the failed attempt to sell a stake in the World Cup itself, and the quiet, high-stakes fight over where the 2030 final will be played. None of them were isolated. They were different fronts in the same economic war. Once FIFA decided it no longer wanted to depend on Europe's business, conflict was no longer optional. It was inevitable. This is not a fight between a villain and a hero. FIFA isn't acting to save football. UEFA isn't reacting to protect it. This is a fight between 2 entities that have always called their financial interests something else. The difference between them is not moral, it's tactical. For the first time in modern football, Europe's dominance was being challenged by an institution that had spent more than a century standing above the market, not inside it. That changed the nature of the conflict, because once the balance of power starts to move, every decision acquires a meaning it never had before. A tournament is no longer just a tournament. A transfer is no longer just a transfer. Even a player can become something else. Lionel Messi never set out to become part of that story. He made a career decision. The market turned it into a strategic event. At 39 years old, playing his club football in Major League Soccer, he delivered the most productive World Cup campaign of his career. 8 goals, 4 assists, the all-time World Cup scoring record. He carried Argentina to the final. What happened next had no precedent in the history of sport. Lionel Messi was, by every available measure, the most beloved athlete on the planet. The first soccer player ever to be named America's favorite athlete, ahead of Michael Jordan, LeBron James, and Tom Brady. The most popular footballer in the world according to YouGov. A man who had spent 20 years essentially beyond criticism. And then, suddenly, he wasn't. What followed was one of the most intense and coordinated campaigns of hatred ever directed at a single athlete. A study of 40,000 posts on X confirmed the pattern was not organic. The conversations were, in the researchers' own words, artificially generated. Multiple football accounts publicly revealed they had been offered money to join an anti-Messi campaign. 23 million people across 170 countries signed a petition demanding Argentina be expelled from the tournament. Egypt filed a formal complaint over refereeing decisions. Hostility toward Argentina in football is not new, but this was different. The most targeted player in the tournament wasn't playing in Madrid or Munich. He was playing in Florida. Europe had spent 30 years building an identity around owning the highest level of the game. Messi had just proved at 39 in MLS that the highest level could exist somewhere else. The anger wasn't irrational, it was instinctive. Not a sport idol, a threat. Messi didn't start this war. He was just its most visible casualty. Caught between two factions that, beneath the rhetoric, want exactly the same thing: power, money, control. Nobody knows who will win this war, but football probably already lost. Next black box, Palantir. They didn't build a surveillance system. They built a trap you can never leave.